What is something scary that has happened to you that you cannot explain rationally? My family owns a decent-sized horse boarding facility, and when we first had it going, we used to do bed check as a family. Bed check is just making sure all the lights and fans were off, as well as looking at the horses for injuries, and if they had blankets during the winter. Well, we had just got back from eating out, and it was a moonless night during fall. As we stepped out of the truck, this large light grey mass stood up and took off loping towards our pastures. It was about the size of a single cab pickup truck. It made no noises other than it hitting the ground as it ran. The only other proof that it was real to us was the horses that were turned out that night screamed and stampeded across the pasture it had jumped into. We did a double count of all the horses that night and not a single one was missing. I still have yet to see it again, and I hope I never do, or at least there is some explanation for it. Fascinating. No determined shape or features, legs, eyes, whatever. If I would describe it, I'd take the description the kids used in Attack the Block. Big alien, gorilla, wolf motherfucker, had a bushy tail and was stacked like a gorilla, big front arms, small back legs, but for some reason it always gave me a wolfish vibe when I think back on it. That was the general shape, couldn't make out many more details. I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitors center with offices, and then the house was about half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with the crew, but there were a lot of times I was there alone. One winter day, when it was really cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to replace some electric work on the exterior of the house. I went inside and turned off the circuit to the whole property, and I tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house, and then one of the lights inside the house turned on. I started to freak out, but thought that maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitors center on my walkie-talkie, and confirmed that the only other person who was working that day was still there and hadn't left, and that all the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran the half-mile up to the office. I made my coworker come back with me to check out what was going on. But when we got to the house, the light was off again, but the bulb was still warm. All the doors were still locked and the circuit was still off. Still gives me shivers to this day. Long story short, light turns on by itself in old house when the electricity is off, which is literally impossible and super spooky. The fact that the bulb was still warm as proof that you weren't lying to your coworker is terrifying. Probably too late, but better late than never. So much weird stuff like this has happened to my family over the years, particularly with my mom. Below are a couple fan favorites. My parents had been married for maybe a month. They were in bed sound asleep when all of a sudden, my mom jumps up and wakes up my dad. Jimmy, there's blood everywhere. We have to help them. Please. My dad tried his best to calm her down and figure out what she was talking about. My mum had explained that she saw a car with a German license plate on the side of the road, that there had been an accident and they needed help. My dad tried to console her, to explain that it was all just a bad dream, but she wasn't having it. So to appease her, they got in the car and drove to the spot my mom thought the accident was. And sure enough, at the exact spot my mum said, there was a car on the side of the road with German plates and emergency flashers on. Upon closer investigation, there was nobody in the car. If they needed help, help had already come. My parents had just had their first child, my oldest sister, Kathy. They had been living in Italy at the time. My dad was in the Air Force, and had brought her back to the US to introduce her to the grandparents, my dad's parents. So their first night there, my mum was asleep in the front bedroom, jet-lagged. My dad had gone out to hang out with his brothers, and in the middle of the night, this woman walks into my mum's room, waking her up. She sits down on the bed and says, "It's okay, I just wanted to welcome you to the family." My mum was scared, obviously, but figured this was some relative or family friend or something that came over. The woman walks over to the bassinet where my baby sister was sleeping. "Is this your daughter?" My mom nodded. she's beautiful. It's lovely to meet you both. And then she leaves. My mom wakes up the next day and is having breakfast with my grandmother when she brings it up. Who is the woman that came over last night? My grandmother had no idea what she was talking about. My mum told her the whole story and my grandmother asked what she looked like. My mum said, she was tall, had long white hair and was wearing a blue dress. My grandmother's face went as white as a sheet. She rummaged through some old pictures and pulled one out. Is this her? She asked my mom, who nodded in return. That's my mother. She's been dead for 20 years and we buried her in a blue dress. I live in a condominium and we own 2 apartments on the 7th and 8th floor. The only way to move in between them is to step out of the apartment, take the elevator or the staircase and enter the other one. One night, we ran out of ice cream upstairs and my mom told me to go get some from the downstairs freezer. So I took the keys to the 7th floor's apartment and since it was dinner time, no one was there. I walked into the pitch dark and realized that someone was sitting on the sofa. So I flipped the switch to see my dad just sitting there. It was kinda weird, but I just went to get the ice cream and asked if he had a key to lock up. No answer. I shrugged and thought, well, if he came in and locked the door behind him, he must have won. Went back upstairs and my dad was sitting there eating dinner. I freaked out and asked how the heck did he get up here so fast, and everyone told me that he's been here all this time. Told them it wasn't possible cause I just saw him downstairs, but no one believed me. Now I never go down there alone. Edit, to clear up some stuff. Each our apartment doors are fitted with 3 types of locks. There's a gate which has its own keyhole and lock. We put another lock in it so you have to unlock this gate twice. Then there's the door and its own lock, so you need 3 keys just to enter our house, if no one is inside. I did get a good look at and it was 100% my father. He's kinda fat and has this serious looking face, so it's kinda hard to mistake him. The apartments are not accessible because not only are they not on the same floor, they aren't even located on top of each other. There's an elevator in between them and they are on different floors, so there is no way for anyone to go up or down without first meeting at the elevator or the staircase. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's cat, but because I never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and coddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in for the night. One night, Buster didn't come back in the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was also well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought he had been harassed by a coyote, but he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how. The house I grew up in was about 100 years old by the time my parents bought it. I lived there until I was 16. For as long as I can remember, I saw what I described as a girl that was pink and see-through. I always called her Pam. It's been 10 years since I lived in that house and I still remember her vividly. My dad got a bit weirded out when I would talk about Pam, and finally when I was 13, my mum put me in therapy because Pam was still something I brought up regularly. In order to stop my parents from thinking I was crazy, I just stopped talking about Pam completely and went on with life. That was until my parents decided to put the house up for sale when I was 16. Just 2 weeks before moving into our new house, I was sleeping, but was woken up by Pam standing in my doorway and pointing into the bathroom that was directly across the hall. All Pam said was, "Look, my mom." And when I looked to see who she was pointing at, I saw a woman hanging by a cord from the light fixture in the bathroom. I remember the woman looked as though she had been hanging there for a while, when all of a sudden the woman's boot fell off and I abruptly woke up. I ran into my parents' room to tell them what happened, and my mom looked at me disappointed because I was talking about Pam again after having kept quiet about her for years. I concluded that it was just a bad dream and went back to bed with no other incidences. Until a few days later, I was once again asleep, and dreaming that I was woken up by crying coming from the bathroom across the hall. I got out of bed and walked over to see what was going on. At that point, I saw the same woman that was hanging from the bathroom light fixture, sobbing and holding a very real little girl under the water in the bathtub. It was then that I realized that the little girl was the little pink see-through girl I had seen my entire life. It was Pam, and she was not moving. I immediately woke up and I was crying uncontrollably. I was 16 years old, and I ran into my parents' room like a 5-year-old, and jumped into bed with my mom. My dad was working at the time. I told my mom what had happened and my mom could see how upset I was and was trying to calm me down. At that same moment, the pink and transparent version of Pam walked through the door. I looked at my mom and just whispered, "Oh my god mom, she's in here," and I pulled the covers up to my neck and just looked at my mom terrified. My mom was speechless. At that point, Pam slowly walked up the side of the bed and began shoving me into my mom. I had never been touched by Pam before. I was screaming and crying and kept yelling, "Stop touching me," and all that my mom could reply was, "I'm not touching you," as she was being pushed out of the other side of the bed. After what seemed like forever, Pam stopped and slowly walked out of the room. I cried myself to sleep, and my mom stayed awake to see what else would happen. I never spent another night in that house, but 2 weeks after we moved out completely, the house caught fire. The entire backside as well as the entire garage burned. The official cause was spontaneous combustion. The house that my family lived in for 25 years has since been bought and sold 8 times within 10 years. No one wants to stay in that house, and I really think that Pam is the reason why. Are there any records to confirm what happened? None. I've done so much research on that house and nothing ever comes up. My sister is in real estate in town, which gives her a little more access to information, and nothing. No idea. Are you able to tell us where that house is? It's so fascinating yet creepy. Frown. It's in a tiny Wisconsin town. The house is actually up for sale right now. After my grandpa died, my grandma said she could feel someone getting into bed with her nearly every night. But we didn't believe her. One night I was watching TV in the living room trying to fall asleep when I heard footsteps in the hallway leading to my grandma's bedroom. I looked out into the hallway and couldn't see anyone, and this happened for probably a minute. Immediately after the footsteps stopped, the TV turned off. I stayed awake for another hour or so but didn't hear anything after that. This used to happen to my grandmother. My grandparents slept in separate bedrooms because my nan liked being cold and my pop liked to be warm. My nan always said that every now and then she'd feel someone get in bed with her and then in the morning she'd feel them get out. She seemed pretty calm about it all. Long story. That sinking feeling you get when you think someone unseen is watching you isn't always wrong. Hunter, mountaineer here. It was a chilly December morning. I hiked in pre-dawn, taking about an hour and a half to go 3 miles off the beaten trails. Got to my nest about half an hour before sunrise and started to settle in. The wind kicked up and a fog rolled in that was thicker than milk. Within a few minutes, my visibility was 5. I'm sitting tight, huddled up against the freezing wind when I start to hear twigs snapping close to me, for no apparent reason. What is normally a rapturous sound indicative of an imminently successful hunt, sent a frosty chill down my spine. I chambered around in my lever action 30-30 as quietly as I could, and lay flat on my back tucked against a fallen tree. The rustling was moving closer through the fog, but I couldn't see anything. The sun was starting to peek over the mountains to my east and visibility was starting to increase. The rustling of twigs and leaves was sporadic, sometimes directly in front of me, sometimes behind or beside me. I remember laying there, rifle across my chest, Thinking to myself how silly it was to react like such a coward, I rationed with myself that bears and mountain lions are a rarity where I was, and I had likely stumbled into a herd of whitetail that had bedded down. I decided to sit up. The rustling stopped immediately, as it was fully dawn by now. I was looking through the fog for the outline of my prey, which I had assured myself was literally all around me. It wasn't. Seemingly, nothing was. By now, the fog had faded away and it was apparent to me that I was alone in those woods. I hunted all that day without seeing so much as a squirrel. Around 3 in the afternoon, after fighting the wind and an abnormally cold day, and not wanting to hike out by flashlight, I decided it was time to start back to the truck. Walking out of those woods was the most uneasy I have ever felt. Lawfully, once you make it back to the trail, you're supposed to clear the chamber of your rifle. Not that day, what is normally a stroll through the woods, I undertook with the seriousness of an animal being stalked. I would walk, then stop and listen. I never heard or saw anything during my retreat, but I could feel eyes on me. I was about 100 feet away from my truck when I rounded the last corner and saw, hanging at eye level from a tree by a noose, a stuffed bear in a blaze orange jacket. I'm a giant, broad-shouldered outdoorsman, but that one shook me something fierce. I was about 100 feet away from my truck when I rounded the last corner and saw, hanging at eye level from a tree by a noose, a stuffed bear in a blaze orange jacket. The deer were sending a message. Was it like a creepy anti-hunter symbol? I don't get why someone would do that, otherwise. A week ago tomorrow, October 20th, I came home from class at around 11:30 and no one else was home. I hung out at home for a bit and at 2:30 I was overcome with sleepiness. Being the bum that I am, I laid down in my bed and set a timer on my phone for a 20-minute nap. I fell asleep quickly and after around 5 minutes I was woken up by my bedroom door opening and had a split second of panic before my dog jumping up onto my bed and laying down next to me. I fell back asleep. After another 5 minutes of sleep, I instantly jolted awake because I was certain there was someone standing next to my bed, behind me. I assumed it was my mother, who would likely be pissed that I was sleeping in the middle of the day. I woke and turned around in one movement and there was no one there. Weird. I checked my phone and had another 8 minutes of sleep left. I went back to sleep only to be woken by my phone ringing. It was my mother. She said that my great aunt, who had been in the hospital after a stroke-like event for a week, had died around 1 o'clock. My mom then said she knew my aunt was going to die today because she had seen a wraith, a sort of ghost, usually warning of someone dying, that morning. My mum is Scottish and very superstitious, but I don't believe in any of that. She said that when she woke up that morning to take my brother to school, she went in my room to see if I was still asleep. She saw a wraith standing next to my bed. My brain shit itself. With that out of the way, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want more content to keep appearing in your subscription box. Thanks for watching and until next time.